One less thing to worry about.
I came as soon as I heard.
Angelica.
All the way from London. Damn!
Angelica, thank God someone who understands what I'm struggling here to do.
I'm not here for you. I know my sister like I know my own mind. You will never find anyone as trusting or as kind. I love my sister more than anything in this life. I will choose her happiness over mine every time. Put what we had aside. I'm standing at her side. You can never be satisfied. God, I hope you're satisfied.
President now. Never gonna be 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 president now. One less thing to worry about. That's one less thing to worry about. Hey, and it's suicide just with your money. Never gonna be president now. And it's suicide just with your money. That's one less thing to worry about. The real champ. Have you read this? You rather see somebody ruin their own life. It's poor life.
Okay, so from 1797 onward, Hamilton was politically adrift. His confession to the affair with Maria Reynolds had sullied his character and his reputation. In addition, Washington's death in 1799 further consigned Hamilton to the political wilderness. Washington had always been Hamilton's patron and protector, and under Washington, Hamilton had grown accustomed to wielding power and influence. But President Adams destroyed this sense of entitlement. Adams isolated Hamilton, and Hamilton never forgave him. Hamilton's fellow Federalists blamed him for splitting the party as a result of his rift with Adams. And Hamilton's relationship with Aaron Burr soured even further. You remember when Burr allied with and ran against Hamilton's father-in-law, and then he allied with New York Governor George Clinton and joined the Democratic Republican Party. Now, 4 years later, when Burr ran for governor of New York, Hamilton was determined to block Burr. He encouraged the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Jay, to step down from the court in order to run against Aaron Burr. And the popular John Jay easily defeated Burr. And once again, Burr blamed Hamilton for his defeat. And so, by the time of the 1800 presidential election, Hamilton was shunned by his own Federalist Party, and he had made enemies of the three contenders for president in 1800: Burr, Adams, and Jefferson. Now, in the election of 1800, the battle between the Federalists and the Republicans led to one of the nastiest campaigns in American political history. The Republican press ridiculed Adams as an old toothless monarch, a repulsive pedant, and a hideous hermaphroditical character who has neither the force and firmness of a man nor the gentleness and sensibility of a woman. Federalists, for their part, savaged Jefferson as an atheist in league with the devil. Now, Adams really had no chance of winning re-election because of the unpopularity of the Alien and Sedition Act. And so the only two who had a real chance was Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr. And they were both from the Democratic Republican Party. And both Jefferson and Burr were sworn enemies of Alexander Hamilton. Now, Hamilton had to make an agonizing decision. Who should he support, Jefferson or Burr? He regarded both men not as statesmen, but as shameless politicians who pandered to voters by telling voters what they thought they wanted them to hear. But Hamilton felt he had to choose the lesser of two evils. Now, that is the background to the song, The Election of 1800. And so we will turn to that now.
The election of 1800.
Can we get back to politics? Please? Yo, every action has its equal opposite reaction. John Adams shat the bed. I love the guy, but he's in traction. Poor Alexander Hamilton, he is missing in action. So now I'm facing Aaron Burr with his own faction.
He's very attractive in the North. New Yorkers like his chances.
He's not very forthcoming on any particular stances.
Ask him a question that glances off, he obfuscates, he dances.
And they say I'm a Francophile. At least they know I know where France is.
Thomas, that's the problem. See, they see Burr as a less extreme you. You need to change course. A key endorsement might redeem you.
Who did you have in mind?
Don't laugh.
Who is it?
You used to work on the same staff. It might be nice, it might be nice to get Hamilton on your side. It might be nice, it might be nice to get Hamilton on your side.
Talk less, smile more. Don't let them know what you're against or what you're for. Shake hands with him, charm her. It's 1800, ladies, tell your husbands, vote for Burr.
I don't like Adams.
Well, he's gonna lose. That's just defeatist.
And Jefferson?
In love with France.
Okay, I'm sorry. For whatever reason, I don't have those lyrics. But in the song, there are these lyrics. The people are asking to hear my voice. This is Hamilton speaking. For the country is facing a difficult choice. And if you are to ask me who I promote, Jefferson has my vote. I've never agreed with Jefferson once. We have fought on like 75 different fronts, but when all is said and all is done, Jefferson has beliefs. Burr has none. So the election wound up in a tie, as you can see. Thomas Jefferson got 73 electoral votes. Aaron Burr got 73 electoral votes. The Constitution says in the event of a tie, the election is then thrown into the House of Representatives, and members of the House of Representatives would then vote. And whoever got the majority vote in the House of Representatives would be the next president. Whoever got the second most votes would be the vice president. Well, when the election was thrown into the House of Representatives, after 35 ballots, they still couldn't come up with one candidate having the majority vote. And so this is where Hamilton stepped in and wrote a letter to a member of the House of Representatives from Massachusetts, who was from Hamilton's Federalist Party. And his name was Harrison Gray Otis. And here is the letter that Hamilton wrote to Otis. Now, the ink over time has bled through the paper. So as you can see, it's almost illegible, but we're going to take a look at this particular document, and we're going to see how Lin-Manuel Miranda used primary sources in order to come up with his lyrics. So keep in mind the lyrics where Hamilton says that Jefferson is the lesser of two evils. So he begins this letter by saying, "This portrait is the result of long and attentive observation of a man with whom I am personally well known," and he's talking here about Aaron Burr. and in respect to whose character I have peculiar opportunities of forming a correct judgment. So he's about to comment on Aaron Burr, and he makes the statement that he knows Aaron Burr very well. He goes on in the letter to say, my opinion is, after mature reflection, that if Jefferson and Burr come with equal votes in the House of Representatives, the former, meaning Jefferson, ought to be preferred by the Federalists. Now you notice Jefferson and Burr are underlined. He underlined their names in the letter. So here he is urging the Federalist Harrison Gray Otis to cast his vote for Jefferson as president. The letter goes on. Mr. Jefferson is a man of easy fortune. Mr. Burr, as I believe, a bankrupt beyond redemption, unless by some coup at the expense of the public, and his habits of expense are such that wealth he must have at any rate. Now, he's referring here to Jefferson as a man of easy fortune, clearly a reference that Jefferson is a slave owner. And he talks about Burr as a bankrupt beyond redemption, meaning that he felt that Burr was both morally and financially wanting. And Hamilton was remarkably prophetic in saying that Burr might resort to a coup in order to secure wealth. And we're going to see that at the end of today's lecture. And so, in this letter, Hamilton demolishes Burr's character. And then he goes on to write, Mr. Jefferson is a man of character for probity, which means a strong morals and decency. Very different ideas are entertained of Mr. Burr by his enemies and what his friends think. Hamilton goes on to say, Mr. Jefferson, though too revolutionary in his notions, is yet a lover of liberty and will be desirous of something like orderly government. Mr. Burr loves nothing but himself, thinks of nothing but his own aggrandizement, and will be content with nothing short of permanent power in his own hands. So when he says that Jefferson is too revolutionary, he's referring to Jefferson's support of the French Revolution, of which Hamilton disapproves. But according to Hamilton, Jefferson is certainly preferable to the power-hungry Aaron Burr. And in the letter's conclusion, Hamilton says, by no means, my dear sir, let the Federalists be responsible for Burr's elevation. In a choice of evils, let them take the least. Jefferson is in every view less dangerous than Burr. So Lin-Manuel Miranda used this document to come up with the lyrics in the election of 1800. Now, by urging Federalists in the House of Representatives to vote against Burr, that was enough to break the tie, and Thomas Jefferson then became the third president of the United States. By finishing second, Aaron Burr became vice president. But Burr, once again, blamed Hamilton for denying him the presidency. Now, Aaron Burr was not satisfied as vice president. He hungered for real political power. In 1804, he decided to run for office once again for the governor of New York. And once again, Hamilton launched into a campaign charging that Burr was a dangerous man who should not be trusted with the reins of government. And Burr and Hamilton traded insults, and they defamed each other's character. Burr lost the election and again blamed Hamilton for destroying his career, first by blocking his path to the presidency, and now by helping to defeat his campaign for the governorship of New York. And this rivalry between Hamilton and Burr is expressed in the song, Your Obedient Servant.
How does Hamilton, an arrogant immigrant, orphan, bastard, whore's son, somehow endorse Thomas Jefferson, his enemy? A man he's despised since the beginning, just to keep me from winning. I wanna be in the room where it happens, the room where it happens, the room where it happens. You've kept me from the room where it happens for the last time. Dear Alexander, I am slow to anger, but I toe the line as I reckon with the effects of your life on mine. I look back on where I failed, and in every place I checked, the only common thread has been your disrespect. Now you call me immoral, a dangerous disgrace. If you've got something to say, name a time and place, face to face. I have the honor to be your obedient servant, A. Burr.
Mr. Vice President, I am not the reason no one trusts you. No one knows what you believe. I will not equivocate on my opinion. I have always worn it on my sleeve. Even if I said what you think I said, you would need to cite a more specific grievance. Here's an itemized list of 30 years of disagreements.
Sweet Jesus.
Hey, I have not been shy. I am just a guy in the public eye, trying to do my best for our republic. I don't want to fight, but I won't apologize for doing what's right. I have the honor to be your obedient servant, A. Ham.
Careful how you proceed, good man. Intemperate indeed, good man. Answer for the accusations I lay at your feet, or prepare to bleed, good man.
Burr, your grievance is legitimate. I stand by what I said, every bit of it. You stand only for yourself. It's what you do. I can't apologize because it's true.
Let's stand, Alexander. We hawking dawn. Guns drawn.
You're on.
I have the honor to be
your obedient servant, A. Ham.
A. Burr.
So Burr demanded that Hamilton retract his most recent insults or face him on the field of honor in a duel. Now, there's a delicate dance that's played around duels at that time. You find a way to make apologies without sounding like you're apologizing. That way, everyone's honor is satisfied and the affair ends. Throughout his lifetime, Hamilton repeatedly attracted controversy. In his mind, he was always right, and he believed that anyone who opposed him was a fool. On at least 6 earlier occasions, he was challenged to a duel, but each time he managed to negotiate his way around it, but not this time. Hamilton came close to retracting what he said about Burr, but Burr would have none of it. He was determined to have it out with Hamilton once and for all. Now, it should be noted that while dueling was widespread, it was not universal. Many states had harsh penalties against dueling, although those penalties were rarely enforced. Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson all deplored the practice. But dueling was particularly prevalent among military officers, and both Hamilton and Burr came from a military background. And so both of them endorsed dueling. Now, 3 years earlier, Hamilton's son, Philip, defended Hamilton's honor from someone who criticized Hamilton. And that led to a duel between Philip Hamilton and Thomas Eaker. When Philip Hamilton told his father that he was going to be engaged in a duel, Hamilton recommended that he fire in the air. And the reason is, Hamilton said that that is the honorable thing to do. Your opponent would not try to kill you, because in duels, the aim was not to kill the opponent, but rather to just wound him. Well, unfortunately, on the dueling grounds, Philip was killed in the duel with Thomas Eaker. Now, that is the theme of one of the songs in the musical, and unfortunately, I don't have the lyrics to that song, but we can listen to it.
Stay alive. Stay alive.
Where's my son?
Mr. Hamilton, come in. They brought him in a half an hour ago. He lost a lot of blood
Is
on
he
the way
alive?
over. Yes, but you have to understand, the bullet entered just above his hip and lodged in
Can I
his right
see
arm.
him, please?
I'm doing everything I can, but the wound was already infected when he arrived.
Philip. Pa. I did exactly as you said, Pa. I held my head up high.
I know. I know you did everything just right.
Even before we got to 10, I was aiming for the sky.
I know.
I was aiming for the sky.
I know, save your strength and stay alive.
Is he breathing? Is he going to survive this? Who did this, Alexander? Did you know?
Mom, I'm so sorry for forgetting what you taught me.
My son,
We played
I
piano.
taught you piano.
You would put your hands on mine.
You changed the melody every time.
I would always change the line.
Shh, I know.
I would always change the line.
I know. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
6, 7, 8, 9.
Good. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 7, 8, 9. 7.
Okay, I'm sorry, you're gonna have to bear with me. Just 1 second here. There. Okay, second. Okay, I'm sorry about this, but I will find it. So just hold on a second. Hamilton, open computer.
Talk amongst themselves.
Yeah, talk amongst yourselves, yes.
Open up the chat.
Okay, so Philip Hamilton's son died on the dueling grounds. And that was traumatic for Alexander and Eliza. And that leads to the song, It's Quiet Uptown, which we're going to listen to now.
There are moments that the words don't reach. There is suffering too terrible to name. You hold your child as tight as you can and push away the unimaginable. The moments when you're in so deep, it feels easier to just swim down. The Hamiltons move uptown and learn to live with the unimaginable.
I spend hours in the garden. I walk alone to the store, and it's quiet uptown. I never liked the quiet before. I take the children to church on Sunday, a sign of the cross at the door, and I pray. That never used to happen before.
If you see him in the street, walking by himself, talking to himself, have pity.
Philip, you would like it uptown. It's quiet uptown.
He is working through the unimaginable.
His hair is gone gray. He passes every day. They say he walks the length of the city.
You knock me out, I fall apart.
Can you imagine?
Look at where we are. Look at where we started. I know I don't deserve you, Eliza, but hear me out, that would be enough. If I could spare his life, if I could trade his life for mine, he'd be standing here right now, and you would smile, and that would be enough. I don't pretend to know the challenges we're facing. I know there's no replacing what we've lost, and you need time. But I'm not afraid. I know who I married. Just let me stay here by your side. That would be enough.
If you see him in the street, walking by her side, talking by her side, have pity.
Eliza, do you like it uptown? It's quiet uptown.
He is trying to do the unimaginable. See them walking in the park, long after dark, taking in the sights of the city.
Look around, Eliza.
They are trying to do the unimaginable. There are moments that the words don't reach. There's a grace too powerful to name. We push away what we can never understand. We push away the unimaginable. They are standing in the garden, Alexander by Eliza's side. She takes his hand. It's quiet uptown.
Forgiveness. Can you imagine? Forgiveness. Can you imagine? If you see him in the street, walking by her side, talking by her side, have pity. They are going through the unimaginable.
So that happened in 1801. Philip Hamilton died on a dueling ground in Weehawken, New Jersey. 3 years later, Aaron Burr challenges Alexander Hamilton to a duel in the very place where Philip Hamilton died. And so the duel took place at 7 a.m. on July 11th, 1804. Weehawken, New Jersey is just across the Hudson River from New York City. Burr and Hamilton faced each other. And what happened next, you will find out about in the song, "The World Was Wide Enough."
One, two, three, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
There are 10 things you need to know.
Number 1.
We rode across the Hudson at dawn. My friend William P. Van Ness signed on as my
Number 2.
Hamilton arrived with his crew, Nathaniel Pendleton and the doctor that he knew.
Number 3.
I watched Hamilton examine the terrain. I wish I could tell you what was happening in his brain. This man is poisoned by political pursuits.
Most disputes die and no one shoots. Number 4.
Hamilton drew first position, looking to the world like a man on a mission. This is a soldier with a marksman's ability. The doctor turned around so he could have deniability.
5.
Now I didn't know this at the time, but we were near the same spot. My son died, is that why? He examined his gun with such rigor. I watched as he methodically fiddled with the trigger.
7.
Confession time, here's what I got. My fellow soldiers will tell you I'm a terrible shot.
Number 8.
Your last chance to negotiate. Send in your second, see if they can set the record straight. They won't teach you this in your classes, but look it up. Hamilton was wearing his glasses. Why? If not to take deadly aim. It's him or me. The world will never be the same. I had only one thought before the slaughter. This man will not make an orphan of my daughter.
Number 9.
Look him in the eye, aim no higher. Summon all the courage you require. Then count.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Number 10. Paces higher.
I imagine death so much it feels more like a memory. Is this where it gets me? On my feet, several feet ahead of me. I see it coming. Do I run or fire my gun or let it be? There is no beat, no melody. Burr, my first friend, my enemy. Maybe the last face I ever see. If I throw away my shot, is this how you remember me? What if this bullet is my legacy? Legacy. What is a legacy? It's planting seeds in a garden you never get to see. I wrote some notes at the beginning of a song someone will sing for me. America, you great unfinished symphony you sent for me. You let me make a difference, a place where even orphan immigrants can leave their fingerprints and rise up. I'm running out of time, I'm running and my time's up. Wise up, eyes up. I catch a glimpse of the other side. Lawrence leads a soldier's chorus on the other side. My son is on the other side. He's with my mother on the other side. Washington is watching from the other side. Teach me how to say goodbye. Rise up, rise up, rise up, Eliza. My love, take your time. I'll see you on the other side. Raise a glass to freedom.
He aims his pistol at the sky.
Wait! I strike him right between his ribs. I walk towards him, but I am ushered away. They row him back across the Hudson. I get a drink. I hear wailing in the street. Somebody tells me you'd better hide. They say Angelica and Eliza were both at his side when he died. Death doesn't discriminate between the sinners and the saints. It takes and it takes and it takes. History obliterates, and every picture it paints me and all my mistakes. When Alexander aimed at the sky, he may have been the first one to die, but I'm the one who paid for it. I survived, but I paid for it. Now I'm the villain in your history. I was too young and blind to see. I should have known the world was wide enough for both Hamilton and me. The world was wide enough for both Hamilton and me.
So Hamilton was determined to fire in the air rather than to fire at Burr. The two men fired their pistols a split second apart. Burr's bullet tore into Hamilton's stomach. The bullet went through his liver and lodged in his spine, while Hamilton's bullet shattered a tree branch 12 feet above the ground. Hamilton seemed to recognize that his wound was mortal because he instantly declared, "I am a dead man." The wounded Hamilton was then rowed across the Hudson River back to Manhattan, where he survived 31 agonizing hours. He finally died at 2 p.m. on July 12th, surrounded by his family. He died at the age of 49, which seems young, but we should keep in mind that the average lifespan for a man at that time was just early 50s. Now, some historians have speculated that maybe Hamilton's decision to throw away his shot was a form of suicide because of his guilt over advising his son to throw away his shot. While it's true that in his final years, Hamilton was seriously depressed by personal and political setbacks, it's more likely that Hamilton was convinced that Burr would not shoot to kill, reasoning that if he did, Burr would be committing political suicide and he would be branded a murderer. Keep in mind that Burr was vice president during this duel. But Burr's motives remain a mystery. It's possible that Burr did not intend to kill Hamilton. The historian Joseph Ellis notes that duelists often just tried to graze their opponents. So it's possible that Burr was just trying to wound Hamilton, and unfortunately, the bullet killed Hamilton. On the other hand, it is possible that Burr's murderous rage towards Hamilton overrode his political interests and that he really wanted to kill Hamilton. Burr never revealed his motives, following his characteristic strategy of talking less and smiling more. A state funeral was held for Alexander Hamilton on July 14th, with a 2-hour procession past thousands of weeping New Yorkers. It was the largest funeral in New York City's history up to that time. Hamilton was buried in the courtyard of Trinity Church, in the heart of the district that would become the center of American finance. And American finance was a subject so dear to his heart. Trinity Church is just a half a block from Wall Street. And there's an interesting postscript to Aaron Burr's life. He remained as vice president, but he became a political outcast. He was denounced by both Federalists and Democratic Republicans for killing Alexander Hamilton. And Jefferson dumped him from the ticket in the 1804 presidential race. Both states of New York and New Jersey indicted Burr for murder, and he fled to avoid arrest. But then New Jersey dropped the charge because Hamilton died in New York. And then a New York grand jury dismissed the murder indictment entirely. But Burr continued to avoid New York as his creditors seized his assets. After leaving the vice presidency, the bankrupted Burr suffered political exile, but that didn't prevent him from entertaining numerous bizarre plots. He concocted a scheme to raise a private army and march into Mexico in order to liberate Mexicans from Spanish rule and possibly proclaim himself Emperor of Mexico. And then he explored various cabals with Great Britain to forge a new empire west of the Appalachian Mountains. So remember in that letter that Hamilton sent that Burr would use a coup in order to regain his wealth. Well, that was prophetic. Burr was arrested and indicted for treason in 1807 because of these plots. But in the trial that followed, the court determined that the prosecution had not produced sufficient evidence to show that Burr had broken any law. Now, during the trial, Burr's defense attorney subpoenaed President Jefferson for documents related to Burr. Jefferson resisted the subpoena, but the courts ruled that a president must produce the documents from a subpoena. Now, Jefferson was the first president to be subpoenaed. Nixon was the second, and Clinton was the third. When Nixon and Clinton were subpoenaed, Nixon had to produce the tapes, and Clinton had to produce material related to the Paula Jones case. And just last week, the Supreme Court ruled that Donald Trump's financial record can be subpoenaed in the investigation of hush money paid to two women who claimed to have had sex with him. So this decision by the Supreme Court last week that President Trump can be subpoenaed has its roots in 1807 in the treason trial of Aaron Burr. Well, Burr was eventually acquitted, but the entire fiasco further destroyed his already declining political career. Effigies of his likeness was burned throughout the country. Burr was harassed by creditors, and he was forced to flee to Europe, where he spent some time in debtor's prison. After a 5-year exile, he returned to New York, but he was never able to erase the stain on his reputation. He died at the age of 80 in 1836, never once expressing remorse for killing Alexander Hamilton. Now let's look at Hamilton's legacy. Alexander Hamilton, the man who so expertly managed the nation's credit, left his family deeply in debt after his death. Although his wife Eliza struggled financially, she never wavered in her loyalty to her deceased husband. She remained active in public affairs for the rest of her life. She helped to establish the first New York orphan asylum in New York City, the first private orphanage in the city. She also raised money to construct the Washington Monument, and she was a committed abolitionist. She remained sharp and alert until her death in 1854 at the age of 97, 50 years after the death of Alexander Hamilton. She is buried alongside her husband in the Trinity Churchyard. Her sister, Angelica Schuyler, is also buried in the same churchyard. Now, When we assess Hamilton's legacy, we have to appreciate his journey from the West Indian island of Nevis to the pinnacle of power in the new American nation. This is as remarkable as it is unparalleled. As were his staggering achievements in just a 30-year span, his role in winning the American Revolution at the Battle of Yorktown, his role in creating a working plan of government during the Constitutional Convention, and his role for laying the groundwork for a fiscally responsible federal government. His life was marred by some serious character flaws, as we have seen, but that only reminds us that great people are not always great all of the time. But much of the criticism leveled at Hamilton during his lifetime was really unwarranted. He did not want to introduce a monarchical system of government, and he did not illegally enrich himself when he was Secretary of the Treasury. In fact, he scrupulously avoided any impropriety when it came to holding the reins of power. And so after the American Revolution, he waived the pension to which he was entitled as an army officer. And he waived his rights to bounty lands that were awarded to other officers because he didn't want to make it seem that he had a conflict of interest. It was precisely because of such honesty that he so often found himself in debt. And now we're going to listen to the final song in the musical Hamilton. And this song is entitled, Who Lives, Who Dies, Who Tells Your Story?
Let me tell you what I wish I'd known when I was young and dreamed of glory. You have no control. Who lives, who dies, who tells your story?
President Jefferson. I'll give him this. His financial system is a work of genius. I couldn't undo it if I tried. And I tried.
Who lives, who dies, who tells your story?
President Madison.
He took our country from bankruptcy to prosperity. I hate to admit it, but he doesn't get enough credit for all the credit he gave us.
Who lives, who dies, who tells your story?
Every other founding father story gets told. Every other founding father gets to grow old.
And when you're gone, who remembers your name? Who keeps your flame? Who tells your story?
Who tells your story? Who tells your story? Eliza.
I put myself back in the narrative. I stop wasting time on tears. I live another 50 years. It's not enough. I interview every soldier who fought by your side.
She tells our story.
I try to make sense of your thousands of pages of writings. You really do write, but you're running out of time. I rely on Angelica. While she's alive, we tell your story. She's buried in Trinity Church near you. When I needed her most, she was right on time. And I'm still not through. I ask myself, what would you do if you had more time? The Lord in his kindness, he gives me what you always wanted. He gives me more time. I raise funds in D.C. for the Washington Monument.
She tells my story.
I speak out against slavery. You could have done so much more if you only had time. And when my time is up, have I done enough? Will they tell your story? Oh, can I show you what I'm proudest of?
The orphanage.
I established the first private orphanage in New York City.
The orphanage.
I helped raise hundreds of children. I get to see them growing up. In their eyes I see you, Alexander. I see you every time. And when my time is up, have I done enough? Will they tell your story? Oh, I can't wait to see you again. It's only a matter of time. Will they tell your story? Who lives, who dies, who tells your story? Will they tell your story? Who tells your story?
No one at the time of Hamilton's death fully appreciated his enormous legacy. But because of his visionary thinking, America had the highest credit rating of any country in the world. And when France gave Thomas Jefferson the opportunity to purchase the Louisiana Territory, which would double the size of the United States, money and credit was readily available, thanks to Alexander Hamilton. In the 19th century, the canals, the railroads, the heavy industry, the huge cities, they were all built on bonds and banks that Hamilton created. Hamilton promoted the idea of a modern nation state with a market economy and a strong central government. And despite the charge that he was an elitist, it should be remembered that as an orphan and as an immigrant, Hamilton supported a society built on talent and merit rather than on birth and breeding. And while Hamilton is commemorated on the $10 bill, in our nation's capital, where there are monuments celebrating the men who created the country, monuments to Washington, Jefferson, and Lincoln, there is no monument to Alexander Hamilton. Following his untimely death in 1804, his reputation remained in the shadows for the next 6 decades. John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, James Monroe, all political opponents of Hamilton and all presidents, they outlived him by decades, and they did everything they could to bury his reputation, which is why there is no Hamilton monument in Washington. It wasn't until the outbreak of the Civil War in 1861 that Northerners fully appreciated the importance of federal power that Hamilton had so long advocated and had so long fought for. Following the Civil War, the Republican Party adhered to Hamilton's agenda with federal aid for infrastructure, federal aid to land-grant colleges, a uniform national currency, a national banking system, tariffs on imported goods to protect American industry. However, Hamilton, who was a strong supporter of big business and big finance, he had his reputation stained in 1929 with the stock market crash, and then with the Great Depression of the 1930s. Many people blamed the Depression on free market capitalism, which Hamilton basically established in the United States. But we should keep in mind that much of FDR's New Deal, as well as the Great Society program of Lyndon Baines Johnson, they embodied the strong federal power that Hamilton advocated. Nevertheless, Hamilton remains the least loved of the founding fathers, at least until the smashing success of the musical that first appeared in 2015. So it's ironic that it took a Broadway production featuring a cast of minorities and hip-hop music to spark curiosity about Hamilton's life and his values, to make the American public truly appreciate the greatness of Alexander Hamilton. Now, I'm going to close by addressing what historians have had to say about Lin-Manuel Miranda's musical Hamilton. When it premiered in 2015, it attracted considerable attention among historians. Historians were delighted by this attention to primary documents and scholarly literature in the form of a Broadway musical. As far as the plot is concerned, the work really does hold up to historical examination, for the most part. Aaron Burr and Hamilton really were big-time rivals. Angelica Schuyler and the founding father flirted endlessly. Hamilton did have an affair with Maria Reynolds, and it really became the nation's first political sex scandal. Maria's husband, James Reynolds, did blackmail Hamilton for his silence about the affair, and Eliza Schuyler devoted the rest of her life to maintaining her late husband's legacy. So the musical really isn't criticized for what it put on the stage. It's more what the play omitted that has had some historians questioning its veracity. The biggest issue has to do with the way the musical addresses the issue of slavery. Early in the show, Hamilton calls himself and his friends revolutionary manumissionist abolitionists, a line that raised a lot of eyebrows among scholars. Hamilton was genuinely anti-slave, even if some scholars say that the intensity of his opposition to slavery was overstated in the musical. He was a founding member of the New York Manumission Society, which was created in 1785. And he did push for the gradual emancipation of slaves, which became reality in New York in 1799, when New York passed an emancipation law. But manumission involves the voluntary release by an enslaver. That means that if you're a manumissionist, that means you urge slave owners to free their slaves. But that's not the same thing as abolitionism. Abolitionism means that you advocate the end of slavery once and for all. So Hamilton was a manumissionist, but he never advocated the abolition of slavery. And while he publicly criticized Jefferson's views on the inferiority of Black people, Hamilton never said that the government should do anything about slavery. In fact, he approved the Constitution that accepted slavery as an institution. In addition, although in the musical Hamilton claims that Burr had no principles, Burr was at least as anti-slavery as Hamilton. And slavery in the 1790s was not just contained in the South. Some of the most heroic characters in the musical owned slaves. So, for example, Hamilton's friend, the tailor Hercules Mulligan, had an enslaved servant. And the family that Hamilton married into, the Schuyler family, they were major slave owners. In fact, the mayor of Albany, New York, recently announced that the city would remove the statue of Philip Schuyler, Hamilton's father-in-law, because at one point, Philip Schuyler owned 27 slaves. Angelica Schuyler and her husband also owned slaves. And Hamilton, who was a lawyer, helped Angelica and her husband with their slave-related transactions, including the $225 purchase of a mother and child. Other critics point out that although the cast is dominated with actors of color, the play is nonetheless focused on the deeds of so-called great white men, saying nothing about the actual contribution of people of color during the Revolutionary War. So, for example, the play says nothing about the role that Black soldiers played on both sides in the Revolutionary War. Immigration is another issue in the Hamilton musical. Throughout the play, Hamilton is described as an immigrant, but that is not technically true. By moving from Nevis to New York, Hamilton was traveling within the British Empire at that time as a British citizen. And that's very different than an immigrant coming to America today from the Caribbean. On the other hand, Hamilton did see himself as an outsider, and he was sometimes seen by others as an outsider. In the play, Hamilton seems to praise immigrants. There's that line, immigrants, we get the job done. It's one of the biggest applause lines in the show. But in reality, Hamilton worried about the impact that immigrants would have on the nation. He was aware that immigrants tended to vote for Jefferson's party, and so Hamilton supported the Alien and Sedition Act, which extended the length of time that immigrants had to wait to apply for citizenship, and which allowed the president to deport immigrants he deemed enemies. After the election of 1800, Jefferson proposed loosening citizenship requirements for immigrants, but Hamilton protested, arguing that immigrants might corrupt America's national character. So even though Hamilton may have been seen as an immigrant, he did not support the rights of immigrants. Finally, some historians have taken exception to the musical's portrayal of Hamilton as the champion of the little guy. In fact, Hamilton was an unabashed elitist who favored big banks, who proposed that senators should serve for life and that the president should be an elective monarch. Hamilton distrusted the masses, and so it was his idea that the president should be chosen by an electoral college rather than by ordinary people. And as the Princeton professor Sean Williams put it, Alexander Hamilton was more a man of the 1% than the 99%. Well, you would never know it from the musical. But other historians believe that these critiques should be taken in stride, given all that the musical has accomplished in making the historical study accessible to today's diverse American society. And that despite some misgivings, historians generally agree that Lin-Manuel Miranda's Hamilton does represent a respect for the historical narrative, particularly in the way the show presents the complicated politics of the early American Republic. And one of the most thrilling things about the show is the way it plays with the tension between history and memory, its emphasis on the bias of sources and the importance of who tells your story. And that bias about who tells your story is particularly relevant in the controversy over Confederate statues today, because even though the South lost the Civil War, the South told the story after the Civil War. And it's only recently that the Southern version of history is being challenged. So I want to thank you for listening to these 4 lectures, which I hope will enhance your enjoyment, your understanding, and your appreciation of the songs and the lyrics in the Hamilton musical.